My name is Brooke Martinez. I'm 36 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew my father. What I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core, because it involves the kind of betrayal that changes everything you believe about family bonds and the people you trust most. Before I reveal what happened on that rain-soaked highway outside Houston, and how I uncovered the truth that would destroy my relationship with my dad forever, let me paint you the picture of how this nightmare began. It was supposed to be a simple favor, the kind of request that happens in families all the time. Dad had called me Tuesday morning, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and warmth that had worked on me for 36 years. "Brooke, sweetheart, I need you to let me borrow Duke for the weekend, taking him up to the lake house for some fishing with the guys from the construction crew. You know how much that dog loves being outdoors." Duke was my chocolate labrador, 7 years old, the closest thing I had to a child. I'd rescued him as a puppy from a shelter in downtown Houston, and he'd been my constant companion through law school, through my messy divorce from Marcus, through building my environmental consulting firm from absolutely nothing into something that mattered. Have you ever had that deep gut feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, but you ignored it completely because you trusted someone with your whole heart? Have you ever wondered how far family loyalty should extend when someone you love commits something absolutely unforgivable? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about trust, family bonds, and the masks people wear to hide their true nature. The thing about my father, Roberto Martinez, is that he'd always been larger than life in our tight-knit family. 64 years old, owner of Martinez Construction Company, the kind of man who commanded instant respect in every single room he entered with his presence alone. My mother had passed away from cancer when I was just 17, and since then, it had mostly been just Dad and me navigating life together. My older sister Elena lived in Denver with her picture-perfect husband and 3 kids, visiting maybe twice a year for major holidays. Dad had always made it crystal clear that I was his favorite, his ambitious lawyer daughter who'd made something significant of herself despite all the obstacles life had thrown our way. But there had always been something about the way Dad treated animals that bothered me deep down, though I'd learned to rationalize it over the years. Not outright cruelty exactly, but a callousness and indifference that made me uncomfortable whenever it surfaced. "They're just animals, Brooke," he'd say, dismissively whenever I'd get emotional about a stray cat or an injured bird we'd encounter. "Don't get so attached to things that can't think or feel the way humans do." I should have listened to that warning sign more carefully. But when you love someone unconditionally, you make excuses for their character flaws and tell yourself, they don't really mean it the way it sounds. So when he asked to borrow Duke for a fishing weekend, I hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before saying yes without any real consideration. The man had raised me practically single-handedly, put me through expensive law school, been there for every major milestone and crisis of my life. How could I possibly refuse such a simple, reasonable request from the person who'd sacrificed so much for my success? "Just be extra careful with him, Dad," I'd said, scratching behind Duke's ears as he loaded my beloved dog into the back of his Ford F-250 pickup truck. "You know how much he means to me. He's literally all the family I have here in Houston." Of course, mija. He's in the best possible hands with me." Those were the last words my father spoke to me while I still trusted him completely. That was the final time I saw Duke alive and breathing. What I didn't know then was that my father had installed a comprehensive GPS tracking system in his work truck 6 months earlier for his construction business operations, and that I still had full administrative access to the online account from when I'd helped him set up the entire digital portal. What I didn't know was that this seemingly insignificant technical detail would become the key to uncovering a lie so monstrous and calculated it would shatter our relationship forever. What I couldn't have possibly imagined was that within 72 hours I'd be staring at digital evidence that would reveal my father's true character in the most devastating and heartbreaking way imaginable. The mystery began on Sunday evening when Dad returned from his fishing trip completely alone. No Duke in the truck bed, no explanation ready, just a casual shrug and words that would haunt my dreams. "Sorry, Brooke. Duke got excited chasing some wild ducks into the marsh and never came back. We searched for hours calling his name, but you know how vast those wetlands are up north. I'm sure some nice family will find him wandering around and take him in." I should have trusted my instincts immediately, but grief has a peculiar way of clouding rational judgment. Standing in my kitchen that Sunday night, watching my father deliver the devastating news about Duke with what I now recognize as practiced indifference and rehearsed casualness, something felt fundamentally wrong about his entire story. His explanation was too neat, too convenient, too perfectly tragic. Duke had been through thunderstorms, 4th of July fireworks, construction noise from Dad's job sites, even hurricane evacuations. He simply wasn't the type of dog to panic and run away from familiar people. But I wanted to believe him with every fiber of my being. God, how desperately I wanted to believe his story was true. The next morning, I called in sick to my environmental consulting firm for the first time in 3 years. Martinez Environmental Solutions could handle impact assessments and compliance. Reports without me for 1 day while I processed losing the most important relationship in my life. I spent countless hours on pet recovery websites, posting Duke's photo on every lost dog forum from Houston to the Louisiana border. I called every animal shelter, rescue organization, and veterinary clinic within a 300-mile radius of Dad's lake house outside Huntsville. That's when the first significant crack in his carefully constructed story appeared like a fault line in an earthquake. "Ma'am, we haven't had any chocolate Labradors brought in this weekend," said the volunteer coordinator at Montgomery County Animal Services. "But you might want to check with the Texas Department of Public Safety. They've been dealing with a lot of roadkill incidents on Interstate 45 between Huntsville and Houston this weekend. It's been a terrible few days for vehicle-animal collisions, unfortunately." The word roadkill hit me like a physical blow to my chest. I hung up immediately and called the Texas Department of Public Safety, my legal credentials and professional connections getting me transferred to the right person quickly. Trooper Jennifer Collins had worked the weekend shift covering Interstate 45 through that corridor. "We did have a serious incident involving a large dog on Sunday morning around 6:30 a.m., she confirmed, her voice professional but genuinely sympathetic. Chocolate Labrador, no collar or identification tags, appeared to have been deliberately abandoned on the roadway near mile marker 52. I'm very sorry to tell you this, ma'am, but the animal didn't survive the impact. We had to call the county cleanup crew to handle the situation. Mile marker 52. I wrote it down with hands that were shaking uncontrollably, though I didn't yet understand why that specific detail would become so crucially important. The location was roughly 40 miles south of Dad's lake house, positioned directly on the main route back to Houston. But according to his story, Duke had run into vast wetlands, not onto a busy interstate highway. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my home office staring at my laptop screen, trying desperately to make sense of the glaring contradiction between Dad's story and the trooper's report. That's when I suddenly remembered the GPS tracking system. 6 months ago, Dad had asked me to help him set up comprehensive fleet monitoring for his construction trucks to track his employees' driving habits, fuel efficiency, and location data for billing purposes. I'd created the entire online account, configured all the alerts and reports, even added myself as a secondary administrator since he claimed to be too old and stubborn for all this computer technology nonsense. My fingers trembled as I logged into the Fleet Tracker portal for the first time since setting it up. Dad's Ford F-250 was listed as vehicle number 1 in the system, and I could access its complete location history, speed data, and stop duration for any date range I wanted. The comprehensive data was all there, timestamps and precise coordinates, painting a detailed digital trail of everywhere that truck had been over the past week. What I found in that data would change everything I thought I knew about my father's character, and what it revealed about Sunday morning at 6:33 a.m. near mile marker 52 would prove that some betrayals cut deeper than you ever imagined possible. Little did I know that this electronic evidence would soon become the central weapon in a confrontation that would expose my father's true nature to our entire extended family and destroy the carefully constructed image he'd maintained for decades. The GPS data didn't lie, even when I desperately wanted it to fabricate some alternative explanation. Sunday morning, 6:33 a.m. Dad's truck had stopped for exactly 5 minutes at mile marker 52 on Interstate 45, not at his lake house fishing spot, not in some remote wetland area where a confused dog might wander off and get lost. Right there on the busy highway where Trooper Collins had discovered Duke's broken body less than an hour later. I printed out the detailed location report, my hands shaking violently as the pages emerged from my home printer. The coordinates were mathematically precise, damning, absolutely undeniable. But the worst part wasn't just the incriminating location data, it was the specific pattern of movement recorded by the system. The GPS showed Dad's truck traveling at normal highway speeds of 70 meters, then coming to a complete stop for exactly 5 minutes, then resuming travel at highway speed after that brief pause. Not the frantic back-and-forth search pattern you'd expect from someone desperately looking for a lost, beloved family pet. My phone rang with Dad's distinctive ringtone. His name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt physically sick seeing it displayed there. Brooke, Mija, I wanted to check on you and see how you're holding up. I know losing Duke is incredibly hard for you, but you have to remember that sometimes these things just happen. Nature can be unpredictable, and, Dad, I need to ask you something very specific. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, controlled and professional in a way that surprised me. Where exactly did Duke run off? Can you be more precise about the location where you last saw him? There was a pause that lasted just long enough for me to realize he was carefully calculating his response, choosing his words with deliberate precision. It was deep in the marshland behind the lake house, maybe 3 miles northeast of the cabin. You know that area gets incredibly dense with cypress trees and standing water? We called for him for hours, Brooke. I'm telling you, we did absolutely everything humanly possible to find him. 3 miles northeast of the lake house. That would put the location at least 50 miles from where the GPS data clearly showed his truck had stopped for those 5 crucial minutes. My father was lying directly to my face, and he was remarkably skilled at it. That afternoon, I drove the hour and a half to mile marker 52 on Interstate 45. I had to see the exact place where my dog died, had to understand what really happened. During those 5 devastating minutes, the location was a straight stretch of highway with wide shoulders and excellent visibility in both directions. Not the kind of place where a dog would accidentally end up unless someone deliberately put him there. I parked on the shoulder and walked the area methodically, looking for what exactly? Physical evidence? Some sense of closure? Some miraculous explanation that would preserve my faith in the man who raised me? Instead, I found fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt shoulder, tracks that perfectly matched the distinctive tread pattern of Dad's Ford F-250. I'd seen those specific Michelin all-terrain treads in his driveway literally thousands of times over the years. Standing there on that empty stretch of highway, with 18-wheelers roaring past me at 80 miles/hour, the horrifying truth crashed over me like a physical force. My father hadn't accidentally lost my dog during a fishing trip. He'd deliberately driven Duke to this remote stretch of interstate and dumped him on the roadway, then driven away, leaving him to die alone and terrified among the speeding traffic. Then he'd looked me directly in the eye and lied about it with the practiced ease of someone who'd been hiding his true nature for decades. But why would he do something so monstrously cruel? That's what tormented me as I drove home through rush hour traffic. Duke was an exceptionally well-behaved dog, friendly with people and other animals, never aggressive or destructive. What could have possibly motivated my father to commit such a senseless, calculated act of cruelty against an innocent animal who trusted him completely? The answer would come at our monthly family barbecue the following Saturday, when Dad would reveal just how deep his capacity for deception and manipulation really ran. What I didn't know was that his lie about Duke was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the GPS evidence I'd discovered would become the key to exposing a pattern of behavior that would shock our entire extended family. The confrontation that was rapidly approaching would change not just my relationship with my father, but how everyone in our family viewed him forever after. The week between discovering the damning GPS evidence and our family barbecue was the longest 7 days of my entire life. I couldn't eat more than a few bites at meals, couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch, couldn't focus on my environmental consulting cases no matter how hard I tried. My assistant Patricia kept asking if I was okay, commenting on my pale complexion and obvious distress. But how do you explain that your entire worldview has been completely shattered by location coordinates and digital timestamps? I considered confronting Dad immediately, picking up the phone and demanding an explanation, but something deep inside held me back from that direct approach. Maybe it was the attorney in me, knowing from years of legal experience that you never reveal your strongest evidence until you're fully prepared to make your case in the most effective way possible. Maybe it was the daughter in me, still desperately hoping for some miraculous explanation that would make this nightmare make sense and restore my faith in him. Or maybe I was just a coward, terrified to face the truth about who my father really was beneath the loving facade he'd maintained for 36 years. During those tortured days and sleepless nights, I found myself remembering incidents from my childhood with completely new eyes and a growing sense of dread. The time our neighbor's orange tabby cat went missing, and Dad seemed unusually unconcerned, even slightly amused by Mrs. Garcia's frantic searching. The way he'd dismissed my tears when my pet hamster died suddenly, telling me I was too sensitive for my own good and needed to toughen up and face reality. How he'd refused to let me volunteer at animal shelters as a teenager, claiming it was a complete waste of time and emotional energy. I'd rationalized all of these incidents then, making excuses for behavior that now seemed clearly problematic. He was a busy construction worker, a single father doing his best under difficult circumstances. He came from a generation that didn't coddle emotions or encourage what they saw as weakness. But now, armed with the knowledge of what he'd done, to Duke, those memories took on a sinister, calculated quality that made my stomach turn. Had I been living with a man capable of genuine, premeditated cruelty my entire life without recognizing the warning signs? The barbecue was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. at Uncle Miguel's house in Katy, a Houston suburb. The whole Martinez clan would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my sister Elena flying in from Denver with her husband and 3 kids. It was supposed to be a celebration of my cousin Ramon's graduation from medical school at UT Health. Instead, it would become the stage for the most devastating family confrontation any of us had ever witnessed. Friday night, I made multiple copies of the GPS reports, the trooper's incident report, and the detailed timeline I'd constructed showing the contradiction between Dad's story and the digital evidence. I put everything in a manila folder and practiced what, I would say, rehearsing the words in front of my bathroom mirror. Dad, I need to ask you about Sunday morning, 6:33 a.m., mile marker 52 on Interstate 45. The words felt like acid burning my throat every time I said them. I arrived at Uncle Miguel's house 30 minutes early, hoping to pull Dad aside for a private conversation before the rest of the family arrived. But when I walked into the spacious backyard, I found him already holding court near the massive gas grill, deep into his fishing story with an audience of fascinated relatives. My 10-year-old nephew Carlos was listening with rapt attention, as Grandpa described his weekend adventure in vivid detail. So there we were just after sunrise, and that dog of Brooks just took off like a rocket into the marsh. Dad gestured expansively with his beer bottle, playing to his audience with practiced showmanship. Must have been scared by some gunshots from other hunters in the area, I guess. We spent the entire morning looking for him, calling his name, following muddy trails through the cypress swamp. But you know how it is with animals. Once they panic and get confused, they just run blindly. Did you find him, Grandpa? Carlos asked, his young eyes wide with concern and hope. We tried everything, mijo. Sometimes animals just want to return to the wild where they came from originally, you know? Maybe he found a nice pack of wild dogs. Up north who'll take good care of him and teach him to hunt for himself. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, so convincingly, with such practiced emotional manipulation. Even knowing the horrifying truth, I could see how his story would fool anyone who heard it. He'd clearly had years to perfect this kind of performance, and he was absolutely masterful at creating believable narratives. But watching him deceive my innocent nephew, watching him spin this elaborate tale of noble effort and unfortunate but understandable circumstances, something inside me finally snapped completely. That's really interesting, Dad, I said, stepping into the circle of family members, with my voice carrying an edge that made several people look up. Because I called the Texas Department of Public Safety, and they found Duke's body on Interstate 45 Sunday morning. Mile marker 52, to be absolutely precise. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable to someone who'd known him for 36 years. The jovial storyteller mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something cold, and calculating underneath before snapping back into place with practiced ease. Interstate 45? That's nowhere near where we were fishing, Brooke. Must have been a completely different dog with similar coloring. What I was about to reveal next would expose not just his lie about Duke, but a pattern of deception and cruelty that went far deeper than I'd ever imagined possible. The barbecue chatter died around us like someone had turned off a radio. Uncle Miguel paused mid-flip of the carne asada. Aunt Rosa set down her margarita with a sharp clink against the patio table. Even the kids stopped their game of soccer to listen, sensing the electricity that crackles in the air before a storm breaks with devastating force. Different dog? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the official photo the trooper had sent me as part of the incident report. Chocolate. Labrador, approximately 7 years old. No collar or identification tags found at 6:45 a.m. Sunday morning. The physical description matches Duke perfectly down to the distinctive white patch on his chest, Dad. And there's something else you should know. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle twitching that I'd never noticed before. He was still smiling for the benefit of our audience, but the expression no longer reached his eyes, which had taken on a wary, calculating quality. Brooke, you're obviously devastated about losing Duke, and grief can make people see connections that aren't really there. Maybe we should discuss this privately instead of, no. The word came out harder and more forceful than I intended, cutting through his attempt to control the narrative. I think our family should hear this, especially since you've been telling everyone what a dedicated hero you were, spending hours searching through dangerous swampland for my lost dog. I pulled out the GPS printouts from my folder, my hands surprisingly steady now that the moment of confrontation had finally arrived. You know that fleet tracking system I helped you install on your construction trucks 6 months ago? The one for monitoring your employees' locations and driving habits? Well, it tracks your personal trips too, Dad. Every single mile, every stop, every movement is recorded with precise timestamps. The color drained from his weathered face like water from a broken dam. For 36 years, I'd seen my father confident, commanding, always completely in control of every situation he encountered. This was the very first time I'd ever seen him look genuinely afraid, and the sight was both satisfying and terrifying. Sunday morning, 6:33 a.m. Your truck stopped for exactly 5 minutes at mile marker 52 on Interstate 45. That's the precise location where they found Duke's body 12 minutes later. I held up the printout, the incriminating coordinates highlighted in bright yellow marker. Care to explain how my dog ended up dead on a busy highway 50 miles from where you claim he ran into the wetlands? The silence was absolutely deafening. Uncle Miguel had completely forgotten about the grill. My sister Elena stepped closer from across the yard, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as she processed what I was implying about our father. You're not seriously suggesting that Elena started, but Dad cut her off with a sharp gesture. Brooke, you're obviously confused about how this technology works. Those GPS things aren't always accurate, especially in remote areas with poor satellite coverage. They're accurate to within 3 feet, Dad. I verified the specifications with Fleet Tracker's technical support team. I was in full attorney mode now, presenting evidence methodically, building an airtight case piece by piece. But wait, there's significantly more evidence. I also contacted every animal shelter, rescue organization, and veterinary clinic within a 100-mile radius of your lake house. None of them had any reports of found chocolate Labradors over the entire weekend. I called the Texas Parks and Wildlife Service about missing dogs in that wetland area. Nothing whatsoever. Your entire story is a complete fabrication. Aunt Rosa gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Roberto, what is she saying about you? My father's carefully constructed mask was slipping completely now, revealing something beneath that I'd never seen before. The genial patriarch was dissolving, replaced by something desperate and ugly that had apparently been hiding there all along. She's having some kind of emotional breakdown, obviously. Losing a beloved pet can make people irrational, cause them to create elaborate conspiracy theories to avoid accepting painful reality. Show them the tire track evidence, Brooke, Elena said quietly from across the patio. My sister might live 2 states away, but she knew Dad's truck as well as I did from all our childhood years. You said you went to the location where they found Duke. What did you discover there? I pulled out my phone again, displaying the photos I'd taken of the tire impressions preserved in the soft shoulder dirt. Michelin LTX MS2 tires, size 275 to 70R18. The exact same tires that have been on Dad's truck for the past 18 months. The same distinctive, aggressive tread pattern that's been parked in his driveway since he bought those tires at Discount Tire on Westheimer Road. The evidence was overwhelming, mathematically precise, absolutely undeniable. But what came next would be even worse than the original crime itself. Because as I stood there watching my father's elaborate lies crumble under the weight of digital proof, I realized this wasn't just about Duke. This was about discovering that the man I'd idolized and trusted my entire life was capable of not just calculated cruelty, but of looking me directly in the eye afterward and lying about it with practiced, effortless ease. The confrontation that was about to explode would reveal truths that went far beyond one terrible act of animal cruelty, and the phrase my father would use to defend his actions would cut deeper than the original betrayal ever could have. The moment when someone you've loved and trusted your entire life reveals their true nature is unlike anything else in human experience. It's not just disappointment or anger. It's the complete reconstruction of your reality in real time, like watching a building you thought was solid crumble before your eyes. As I stood there in Uncle Miguel's backyard, watching my father's carefully constructed lies disintegrate under the weight of GPS coordinates and tire tread evidence, I felt like I was meeting a dangerous stranger who happened to share my DNA and last name. Okay, fine. Dad's voice exploded across the silent gathering like a gunshot, causing little Carlos to instinctively step behind his mother for protection. You want the absolute truth, Brooke? Your precious dog was becoming a serious liability. He was getting aggressive with strangers, snapping at people who came too close. What if he bit someone and I got sued? What if he attacked a child and destroyed everything I've worked to build? I've got a business to protect, a reputation to maintain in this community. The lies kept pouring out of his mouth, each one more desperate and transparent than the last. Elena looked up from where she was standing with her family. Dad, Duke never showed any aggression toward anyone. He was the gentlest dog I've ever met. Remember last Christmas when he let the kids use him as a pillow while they watched movies? You don't know what you're talking about. Adults are speaking here. The harsh dismissal of his own daughter sent a shockwave through our gathered family. Uncle Miguel stepped forward, his usually jovial face dark with growing anger. Roberto, you don't talk to Elena that way. She's a grown woman with children of her own. But I could see what was happening with crystal clarity. Dad was cornered like a trapped animal, and cornered animals become vicious and unpredictable. All the charm, all the charisma, all the leadership qualities that had defined Roberto Martinez for 64 years were evaporating like morning mist, revealing something cold and calculating underneath that had apparently been there all along. This was who he really was when the mask finally came off completely. You want to know what really happened out there? His voice had taken on a cruel edge I'd never heard before, not even during his worst moments. Your mutt was getting old. And expensive, Brooke. Constant vet bills, special food, all that money wasted on an animal that was going to die soon anyway. I did you a favor by ending it quickly instead of letting you throw away thousands on medical bills. The gasps from my family members felt distant and muffled, as if I was hearing them from underwater or through thick glass. Elena grabbed my arm, steadying me as the full horror of what my father had just confessed sank into my consciousness like poison. You killed my dog because you thought he was too expensive to keep alive? My voice sounded hollow, mechanical, like it was coming from someone else entirely. I made a practical decision based on economic reality. Something you've never been able to do, Brooke. Always too emotional, always too attached to things that don't matter in the long run. Just like your mother was before she died. The mention of my deceased mother, his own wife who'd battled cancer for 2 years, in such a callous, dismissive context sent Elena into a rage I'd never witnessed from my normally composed sister. Don't you dare bring Mom into this. She would be absolutely horrified by what you've become, by what you've been hiding from us all these years. What I've become? Dad laughed, but there was no humor in the sound whatsoever. I'm exactly the same man I've always been. I just stopped pretending to care about things that don't deserve emotional investment. Animals, feelings, all this sentimental garbage that keeps people from making necessary hard choices in life. That's when I understood with perfect clarity. This wasn't an aberration. Wasn't some temporary lapse in judgment brought on by stress or circumstances. This was who Roberto Martinez had always been, hidden beneath layers of practiced charm and calculated kindness that he'd maintained like a theatrical performance. The loving father, the devoted husband, the respected businessman, it had all been an elaborate facade, and I'd been the most devoted member of his audience for 36 years. But I wasn't finished with my case. The GPS evidence had given me power I'd never possessed before, the power to expose him completely in front of everyone who mattered. And what I was about to reveal next would ensure that everyone in our family understood exactly who they'd been trusting and respecting. All these years, there's something else that everyone needs to know, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us. The GPS tracking shows this wasn't the first time your truck has stopped at that location. Mile marker 52 appears in your travel history 4 other times in the past 8 months. Always on Sunday mornings, always for just a few minutes. The revelation would transform this family gathering into something none of us would ever forget, and the public vindication that followed would be more complete and satisfying than I ever could have imagined in my wildest dreams. The words hung in the air like a death sentence that couldn't be taken back. 4 other times, 4 other Sunday mornings, 4 other brief stops at mile marker 52. The implication was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that for several moments nobody in our gathered family could speak. Even the neighbor's barking dog seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and fell silent. "What exactly are you saying, Brooke?" Aunt Rosa's voice was barely a whisper, filled with dread. I pulled out the complete GPS history I'd printed and analyzed, my hands no longer shaking because the attorney in me had taken complete control of the situation. February 12th, 6:41 a.m., 4-minute stop. March 19th, 6:38 a.m., 5-minute stop. April 23rd, 6:44 a.m., 3-minute stop. May 28th, 6:39 a.m., 6-minute stop. And then June 4th, last Sunday, 6:33 a.m., 5-minute stop. That's when he dumped Duke. Uncle Miguel's face had gone completely ashen. "Roberto, please tell me you haven't been systematically—" "Haven't been what?" Dad's voice was defiant now, but I could see the panic spreading in his eyes like wildfire. He knew exactly what was coming next, and he knew there was no escape. "I called the Texas Department of Public Safety about those other dates too," I continued, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word of damning evidence. February 12th, they found a German Shepherd mix. March 19th, a Golden Retriever. April 23rd, a Border Collie mix. May 28th, a Beagle, all found at or within half a mile of mile marker 52, all reported as apparent hit-and-run victims. The sound that came from Aunt Rosa was barely human, a keening wail of horror and disbelief. Elena's husband covered their children's ears, though they were too young to fully understand what was being revealed. Even my tough Uncle Miguel looked like he was going to be physically sick. "You've been systematically killing people's beloved pets for months," I said, my voice cutting through the horrified silence like a blade. "Taking them from their families under false pretenses and dumping them on busy highways to die terrified. And alone. How many others, Dad? How many innocent animals have you murdered that don't show up in the GPS records because you use different routes or locations?" That's when he said it. The phrase that would end our relationship forever and reveal the true depths of his cruelty, spoken with a casual shrug while surrounded by his horrified family. "They're just animals, Brooke. Get over it already. At least I saved their owners. The trouble and expense of costly euthanasia procedures when they got old." The callousness of that statement, delivered with dismissive indifference while looking at the shocked faces of people who had loved and respected him for decades, was the final piece of evidence I needed. This wasn't just about Duke anymore, or even about the other innocent victims. This was about a man who had spent decades hiding his true nature behind a carefully constructed facade of respectability, and I had just ripped that mask away in front of everyone who mattered most. Uncle Miguel was the first to react with the fury this revelation deserved. "Get out." His voice was quiet, but carried absolute finality. "Get out of my house. Get out of my sight. You're not welcome in this." family anymore, Roberto. Miguel, you're completely overreacting to, get out! The roar from my normally gentle uncle silenced even the traffic noise from the nearby street. Before I call the police myself, before I personally tell them about all the families whose beloved pets you've stolen and murdered for your own sick entertainment. But I wasn't finished. The vindication I'd waited for, dreamed of during those tortured, sleepless nights, was finally here, and it was more complete and satisfying than I'd ever imagined possible. Dad, I've already contacted the Harris County Police Department. Detective Rodriguez, no relation, is expecting my call tonight with all the evidence. The GPS records, the tire track photos, the correlation with highway patrol incident reports. They're opening a formal investigation into multiple counts of animal cruelty, theft, and possibly fraud if any of these pets were registered purebreds with significant monetary value. The look on his face, pure shock at being completely outmaneuvered by the daughter he'd always underestimated and dismissed, was worth every moment of pain and betrayal he'd caused me. Elena stepped forward, her architect's precise mind already working through all the implications. The business licenses, Dad. Martinez Construction won't survive this kind of criminal scandal. Animal cruelty charges, theft, lying to police during investigations. You'll lose everything you've worked for. The public vindication was complete and devastating. In front of our entire extended family, the man who had commanded respect and admiration for decades stood exposed as a cruel fraud, who murdered innocent animals for his own twisted psychological gratification. 4 months later, I'm sitting in my completely renovated home office, looking at the framed photo of Duke that now holds the place of honor on my desk next to my law degree. The intervening weeks have been a whirlwind of criminal investigations, family healing, and personal growth that I never could have anticipated during that terrible Saturday afternoon confrontation. The criminal investigation moved with impressive speed once Detective Rodriguez reviewed my meticulously documented evidence. The GPS records were mathematically irrefutable, and when they obtained search warrants for Dad's property, they discovered a disturbing collection of pet collars, tags, and leashes hidden in his garage, gruesome trophies from his victims, that he'd kept like some kind of serial killer. The final count was 12 animals over 14 months. All beloved family pets he'd either stolen outright or convinced trusting owners to let him take to the country for exercise. The criminal charges included 12 counts of animal cruelty, theft of property, fraud, and interfering with police investigations. Roberto Martinez, once the respected owner of a successful construction company, was sentenced to 30 months in state prison and 7 years probation. Martinez Construction closed permanently within weeks, unable to survive the devastating scandal and media attention. But the legal victory was only part of my vindication and healing process. The family gathering that followed 3 weeks after the barbecue confrontation was unlike anything in our family's history. Uncle Miguel hosted it at his house again, this time as a celebration of truth, justice, and family bonds that actually matter. Elena flew back from Denver specifically to tell me how proud she was of my courage in exposing Dad's lies and protecting other innocent animals. Aunt Rosa, through tears of gratitude, apologized for all the times she'd dismissed my oversensitivity about animals, admitting she'd always sensed something was fundamentally wrong with Roberto's attitude toward pets, but had been too intimidated to speak up against his authority. The most meaningful vindication came from an unexpected source that touched my heart deeply. Carlos, my 10-year-old nephew, approached me during that healing family gathering with a handmade card he'd created at school. Inside, written in his careful 4th-grade handwriting, he'd written, "Thank you for telling the truth about Grandpa. Roberto, Aunt Brooke. Duke was a good dog, and he didn't deserve what happened to him. You're the bravest person I know, and I want to be like you when I grow up." Today, I volunteer 15 hours a week at the same animal shelter where I originally adopted Duke 7 years ago. I've used my legal expertise and professional connections to help them dramatically tighten their adoption screening processes and pursue justice for animal cruelty cases throughout Harris County. It's become much more than just volunteer work. It's become my personal mission to ensure that no other family has to experience the heartbreak and betrayal that I went through. The empty space where Duke used to sleep beside my bed has been filled by Max, a chocolate Labrador mix I adopted 3 months ago, who bears a striking resemblance to my beloved Duke. He's younger, more energetic, and has helped heal the hole in my heart that I thought would never close completely. Sometimes I catch myself telling him about Duke, about how much he would have loved playing fetch with a younger dog in our backyard. My relationship with my father is permanently over, and I'm completely at peace with that decision. Some betrayals are simply too profound and calculated to forgive, and some people reveal themselves to be fundamentally different from who you thought they were for decades. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about the people who show up for you when truth matters more than comfort, when doing what's right is more important than keeping peace. The GPS evidence that exposed his elaborate lies sits framed on my office wall, a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest technological details can uncover the biggest truths about human character. I've become the family member others turn to when they need someone to stand up for what's right, even when it requires tremendous courage and sacrifice. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's morally right? Have you discovered that someone you trusted completely was living an elaborate lie? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on finding the courage to expose uncomfortable truths when it matters most, because sometimes the hardest thing we can do is also the most necessary for justice and healing. 6 months after that life-changing confrontation, I received a phone call that would provide the final piece of closure I didn't even know I needed. Detective Rodriguez called to inform me that my case had inspired a broader investigation into animal cruelty networks across Texas. The evidence I'd provided, particularly the GPS tracking methodology, had become a template for other law enforcement agencies investigating similar crimes. Ms. Martinez, I wanted you to know that your father's case has led to the arrest of 3 other individuals involved in organized pet theft rings, Detective Rodriguez explained. Your meticulous documentation and technological approach gave us a roadmap for identifying patterns we'd never been able to prove before. The impact extended beyond criminal justice. My story had been featured in several legal journals as a case study in using consumer technology for criminal investigations. Law schools were using my GPS evidence methodology in their criminal procedure courses. More importantly, animal rescue organizations across the state had implemented similar tracking protocols for their adoption follow-ups. I also learned that several of the families whose pets my father had murdered had formed a support group. They reached out to thank me for giving them answers they'd never expected to receive. Mrs. Chen, whose golden retriever Buddy was one of Dad's victims, wrote me a letter that I keep in my desk drawer. For 8 months, we blamed ourselves for losing him. We thought we'd failed as pet owners. Your courage in exposing the truth freed us from that guilt. The ripple effects of standing up for what was right had created changes I never could have anticipated. My environmental consulting firm had gained several new clients who specifically sought me out after reading about the case. They wanted to work with someone who had demonstrated integrity under pressure, someone willing to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Elena and I have grown closer than we've ever been. She visits Houston quarterly now, and our kids have developed the kind of relationship I'd always hoped they'd have. We've created new family traditions that honor truth-telling and protecting the vulnerable. Last Christmas, instead of our traditional gift exchange, the entire family volunteered at the animal shelter where I work. Uncle Miguel has become something of a father figure to me, stepping into the void left by Roberto's absence. He's taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about people who choose to love and support you, especially when that choice requires courage and sacrifice. The legal consequences for my father were just the beginning of his downfall. His mugshot appeared in local newspapers, and former clients began coming forward with stories of questionable business practices and inflated billing. The construction industry in Houston is tight-knit, and word travels fast about someone who can't be trusted. Even after his release from prison, he'll never work in construction again. Most surprisingly, this experience led me to find love again. David, a veterinarian I met while volunteering, understood my passion for animal welfare in a way my ex-husband never could. He'd actually treated 2 of my father's victims before their deaths, and hearing my story helped him process his own guilt about not being able to save them. Our relationship is built on shared values and mutual respect, something I never had before. The little shrine I've created for Duke in my home office has become a place of reflection rather than grief. His photo sits next to my law degree, my environmental certifications, and now a commendation from the Harris County District Attorney's Office for civilian assistance in criminal investigations. It reminds me daily that seeking justice, even when it's painful, can create positive change that extends far beyond your own situation. Looking back, I realized that confronting my father was the moment I truly became an adult. For 36 years, I'd been seeking his approval, trying to make him proud, accepting his version of reality even when it contradicted my own instincts. The GPS evidence didn't just expose his crimes, it freed me from the need to be anyone other than who I really am.